Maseches Kesubos Daf Chafei continues the Gemara's discussion. The Gemara has been asking, what is the halach if you see a Kohen doing Berachos Kahanim, he's doing the Duchening, can you assume based on that he must be a kosher Kohen for other halachos, and therefore you would allow him to marry a regular Yisraelis? You assume he's not a sin mamzer, he's not a halal according to some Rishonim. Can you learn from the fact that he's doing the Siyas Kapayim that he is a Kohen or not? So the Gemara is going to bring 3 proofs and reject them, and the Gemara is going to bring a number of stories, incidents that happened where somebody came to testify about the status of a person as a Kohen or even a Levi, and whether or not his testimony was accepted. Before we begin, we need to see a Gemara that's halfway through the daf. The Gemara discusses a comparison to the halacha of Truma and Chala. Now, Truma and Chala are both matnas kahuna, gifts that are given to Kohanim. Both of them are very severe. They carry the Isser of Misa B'nei Shemayim if Yisrael eats them. However, the question is, what is the status of these things in Chutz La'aretz or Bizman Hazeh after the Beis HaMikdash has been destroyed? So there's a machlokes about Truma. Is Truma Bizman Hazeh deraisa or is it derabanan? That is machlokes Tanaim, which we've seen. Says the Gemara, there's also machlokes Amoraim. What is the relationship between Truma and Chala? Is Chala considered to be more severe, more likely to be deraisa Bizman Hazeh than Truma, or is Chala less likely to be deraisa than a Truma? So the Gemara says that this ends up being an argument between Rav Huna, Breda of Yeshua, and the Chachamim. The Rav Huna, Breda of Yeshua said, I came to the yeshiva and I found that the Chachamim were saying that even according to Mani Yam, that Truma today is derabanan, Chala is deraisa. Meaning Chala is more severe. Chala is definitely deraisa according to all opinions. That is what the Rabbanon held in the yeshiva. Rav Huna, Breda of Yeshua said, no, it's the opposite. Even according to Mani Yam, that says a Chala that says a Truma Bizman Hazeh is deraisa, Chala is only derabanan. Chala is more likely to be derabanan, less likely to be deraisa. What is our argument based on? So Truma Bizman Hazeh, according to the opinion that it is deraisa, is learned out the fact that it says degoncha. It's got to be your grain. It has to be your grain in Eretz Yisrael after the division of Eretz Yisrael, after everything was conquered and divided. That's the only time that you have Truma deraisa. According to the other opinion, they don't make that limud. It could be deraisa even if it's not in Eretz Yisrael when there's kedushas Eretz Yisrael, when it's Rav Yeshua out. Now, Chala, the Torah uses a funny word. When it introduces the topic of Chala, it says Bivoyachem. When you are coming to Eretz Yisrael, that is when the mitzvah of Chala begins. Most other mitzvahs that are dependent on Eretz Yisrael doesn't say Bivoyachem. It says Kisavoy or Kisaviyu. It doesn't say when you come to Eretz Yisrael. So what is the significance of that? So according to the Rabbanon, they say that the fact that it says B'voyachem, that it teaches that the mitzvah of Chala began as soon as they came into Eretz Yisrael. They did not have to wait until they conquered Eretz Yisrael and until they divided and gave out the Chalakim of Eretz Yisrael. As soon as they entered Yisrael, it was already a mitzvah of Chala. That shows that the mitzvah of Chala began as long as there were people in Eretz Yisrael, even if you didn't have the kibush yet, you didn't have the kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, even though today we have been thrown out of Eretz Yisrael, even if you hold that the kedusha Rishona was batal already, the Chala Bizman Hazeh stays deraisa. It's not dependent on anything. Therefore, even if you hold that Truma is derabanan, Chala is more likely to be deraisa. That's the opinion of the Rabbanan. Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua said the opposite is true. The fact that it says B'vo'achem, the stress is on the B'vo'achem, on the chem. It's only when you are all here. It's not when some of you are here. When a couple of spies came in Eretz Yisrael, I think the mitzvah of Chala began. No, only when the entire Klal Yisrael came. It's true that it was before the kibush, but only when the entire Klal Yisrael was there. When we came back from Bavel for the second Beis HaMikdash, we did not have the entire Klal Yisrael come. As a matter of fact, only a minority came. And therefore, the mitzvah of Chala did not return as a deraisa, it only returned as a derabanan. Even if you held a Truma as a deraisa, Chala is limited because it says B'va'achem Chala, therefore it's only derabanan. So therefore, we have these two opinions. One version, you have that Truma is deraisa and Chala is derabanan. You have another one that Chala is deraisa and Truma is derabanan. Okay, with this in mind, let's begin a first proof, which comes from a brisa. The first 2 proofs are going to be the very same structure. We have a brisa that says you can learn from the fact that someone does Nesiyas Kapayim, someone does Berachos Kohanim, that he is a Kohen, and we're not going to know what does it mean that he is a Kohen, in what. So let's see the first brisa. Brisa says that you can establish that someone is a Kohen based on the fact that he does Nesiyas Kapayim in Chutz La'aretz, that is in Bavel specifically, the fact that he eats chala in Surya, and the fact that he takes the other matnas kahuna, that is the parts from karbanos, in big cities, specifically in Eretz Yisrael. So these 3 things in these 3 regions establish that he is a Kohen. Now, why these 3 things? What's pshat in the brisa? The explanation is as follows. In order to have Nesias Kapayim, to have Berachas Kohanim prove that he's a Kohen, there has to be a Beis Din there that's going to investigate who's claiming that they can do Berachas Kohanim. In Bavel, there was a Beis Din. Now, Surya, you didn't have a Beis Din, but Surya was an area that was conquered by David HaMelech and was potentially added on to Eretz Yisrael as part of his personal conquest. It was what's called Kibush Yochid. This Tana holds that it's part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore if you have Kohanim they were eating from Surya, so that counts as Truma D'Oraisa, and you're eating Truma in a place that's Truma D'Oraisa, that proves that he's a real Kohen. Now, as far as the parts of Korbanos, that if he's eating it in the big cities, that means he's doing it in a public space and is letting people see him eating that. Again, that proves that he is Kohanim. If it's not in a big space, that doesn't prove anything. All right, anyway, that's Pshat on the Brisa. But what's our proof from here? So the Gemara says, you see, we said that you can prove from the Nesias Kapayim, from Berachas Kohanim, that he is a Kohen. What does it mean that he is a Kohen? A Kohen le'inyan what? Obviously a Kohen le'inyan marriage. So Gemara says, no, it's proving that he's a Kohen le'inyan eating Truma. The Gemara says, what do you mean proving he's a Kohen le'inyan eating Truma? It said in the Bryce itself said that he's eating challah. Challah is one of the things which proves that he is a Kohen. So challah and truma are the same din. Challah and truma are the same halacha. They're both manas kahuna that carry misa b'dei shemayim. So how could you say that proving he's a Kohen means proving that he can eat truma? That means that if he eats challah, that proves that he can eat truma. That doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing. If he's eating challah, by definition, he's eating truma. So the Gemara says no, not necessarily, because we're talking about challah, which is their rabbanon, and truma, which is their raisa. We're going according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, of Rav Huna Brei, Rabbi Yeshua, who holds that there is an opinion out there that challah is the rabbanon and truma is the raisa. And what this Bryce is telling me, according to that opinion, is that if he's eating challah, which is a derabanan, you can establish that he's allowed to eat truma if he's eating. That is, if he's eating challah, which is derabanan, he's allowed to eat truma, even though that is a deraisa. All right. Next proof is from a similar brisa. This brisa says you can establish this person as a Kohen based on the fact that he does Nesias Kapayim, there's Berachas Kehuna, and that he takes from the granaries, most likely means that he takes Truma. That's if he does that in Eretz Yisrael. So in Eretz Yisrael, Berachas Kohanim and Truma is a proof. That is because in Eretz Yisrael there was a Beis Din, and Berachas Kohanim you need a Beis Din, and Truma is deraisa in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it's a proof. Now, what about in Surya and other places where the messengers of the Beis Din reached to announce that Rosh Chodesh has been established? That is a 15-day travel all around Eretz Yisrael in every direction where they sent messengers to say that Rosh Chodesh was established. Then those entire regions, so the halacha over there is that you can establish kahuna based on Nesias Kapayim, based on Berachas Kohanim, because there is a Beis Din in all these places, but not the granaries. The granaries doesn't count because there it's only Truma D'Oraisa. So if he's eating it's only Truma D'Rabbanan. So there, if he's eating Truma, doesn't prove anything. Now, what about Vavel? So that counts like Syria because it is also has a Beis Din, but it's not Truma D'Oraisa. Shimon ben Gamliel adds Alexandria of Mitzrayim also counts as those regions like Syria and Bavel. At least it did in the beginning because it had a Beis Din Kavua there also. And therefore it's the same status as any place that has the Beis Din but does not have Truma D'Oraisa. So the Gemara says, okay, so you see here clearly that you can establish that a person is a Kohen based on the fact that he's doing the Nesias Kapayim in Eretz Yisrael. Obviously, it's talking about that he's a marriageable Kohen, and that's what it means. So it's a clear proof. The Gemara says, no, we don't mean to say that. We mean to say that he can establish it, that he's a Kohen as far as eating challah. As far as eating challah, but then how could you say that if he was eating truma in Eretz Yisrael, you establish he's allowed to eat challah? Truma and challah the same thing. Says no, same answer as we said before, but this time flipped. We're talking about where according to the opinion that Truma is derabanan and Chala is deraisa, and it's coming to tell you that even though Truma is only derabanan, the fact that someone's eating Truma is enough to establish that he's allowed to eat Chala. And here's where the Gemara brings in the entire discussion between the Rabbanan and Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna Brei de Rav Yeshua. All right, now we get to our third proof. This is a brisa. It says, again, you could establish that someone is a Kohen based on Nesiyas Kapayim, based on Berchus Kohanim, also based on taking Truma from the granary, and based on testimony. The Gemara says, testimony? What do you mean? You're going to establish he's a Kohanim based on testimony? That's not your establishing. The word that's used here for establishing is chazaka. You're not establishing something with a chazaka. You have testimony. You have witnesses. He's definitely a Kohen. You're not establishing anything. What it must be what it means to say is as follows, that an establishment that comes through Nesiyas Kapayim or eating Truma has the same status as testimony, as if you have Eidim. And that means to say that you're allowed to therefore use it Le'inyan Yochsed, Le'inyan Kahuna, Le'inyan genealogy. So Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. What it means to say is that if you have testimony to a certain activity that you didn't see yourself, you can build a chazaka off of that. Just like you can build a chazaka off seeing somebody do Berchus Kahanim or something like that, you could also build a chazaka off if you have testimony that he did Berchus Kahanim or something like that. So the Gemara says this. I'll give you an example of this. It was a story that happened with Rabbi Ami. Somebody came before Rabbi Ami, and he testified that someone is a Kohen. Says Rabbi Ami, how do you know? He said, I saw that he got the first aliyah in shul. So the first aliyah is reserved for Kohanim, so therefore it must be a Kohen. Rav Ami said, maybe not. Maybe he was the Gadol. Maybe he was a tremendous Talmid Chacham who could take that aliyah instead of Kohanim. Somebody says, no, it can't be, because the next aliyah after him was a Levi. Now, you can't call a Levi after Yisrael. So if this first person was not a Kohen, if they called him out because he was the Gadol, then they wouldn't give a Levi afterwards. So this proves that it must have called him because he was a Kohen. So therefore he is a Kohen. And Rav Ami accepted this testimony, and based on that he established that this person was a Kohen. So you see, testimony can create a mitzias, can create a reality, which based on that reality we can use chazaka to establish that the person is actually a Kohen. Now, once we have this, the Gemara brings a few other similar stories. The Gemara says somebody came to Rav Yeshua and he said, I'm going to testify about somebody that he's a Levi. He said, what did you see? He said, I saw that he got the second aliyah in shul. Says the Gemara, how do you know he got the second aliyah in shul? Maybe what actually happened was that he was the Gadol. So there were no Kahanim, there were no Leviim there. And they gave him the second aliyah because he was a great man. Not as great as the one before him, but greater than everyone else. So the Gemara says, no, that can't be, because the one who got the aliyah before him was a Kohen. You cannot get a second aliyah, you can't give the second aliyah to a Yisrael if the first aliyah is a Kohen. If you don't have a Levi, two Kahanim get in a row. So, or the Kohen himself gets twice. The fact that he got the second aliyah must be that the first aliyah was a Kohen, and the second aliyah was this guy, and the only way that could be is if he's a Levi. Or if he's a Kohen, but he's not claiming that he was a Kohen. Says the Gemara, a similar story, somebody came to Reish Lakish, and he said, I know about somebody that he is a Kohen. He said, how do you know? He said, he got the first aliyah in shul. So he said, did you see him take grain from the granary? Did you see him take truma? So apparently Reish Lakish was not accepting testimony about which aliyah he got to establish that somebody was a Kohen. He wanted more than that. He wanted to see that he took truma. So Rabbi Elazar asked him, so what are you supposed to do in a place where there's no truma? If there's no granary in a town, you can't establish that anybody is a Kohanim anymore. So the Gemara says that Reish Lakish was upset about this because Reish Lakish had this conversation exactly with Rabbi Yochanan. And Reish Lakish had required a person to show that he took truma in order to establish that he's a Kohen. And Rabbi Yochanan said that exact phrase, if there's no granary, there's not going to be a Kohanim. And then Rav Elazar said the same thing. Rav Elazar was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, but he didn't say it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So Reish Lakish gave him a look of sorts, or perhaps an ayin hara, the fact that he said this, and he did not quote Rabbi Yochanan, his Rebbe, which was the source of this exact phrase. As a matter of fact, Rav Elazar may have been present at the conversation altogether. All right. Now, the Gemara says that Rebbe and Reb Chia, one of them used the testimony of a man's father to establish that he was a Kohen, and one of them used the testimony of a man's brother to establish that he was a Levi. So which one was which? Someone said it was probably Rebbe, who was the one who accepted testimony from the father to establish that the son is a Kohen. Because you have a brisa which says somebody came and he said, this son of mine is a Kohen, he's believed to give that son the right to eat truma, but he's not believed to give him the right to marry. He does not establish that he's a kosher le'inyan marriage. Again, we'd have the same machlokes rishonim, whether it's talking about nasin or a mamzer, according to Rashi, or it's talking about halal, according to the other rishonim. Now, this was all Rebbe. This Bryce is quoting Rebbe. Reb Chia said to him, what's the difference? If you trust him to eat him truma, you should trust him to be able to get married. So Rebbe responded that it's different because the father gives his son the ability to eat truma. He eats truma based on the fact that he's the son of the father, even if he's not a Kohen. Since the father is a Kohen, he can take the truma that he has and give it to him. Since it's biyado, we accept his testimony as well. But it does not help for marriages. So we've established, therefore, that Rebbe is the one who allowed a testimony of the father to establish that the son is a Kohen. And Rebbe Chia, therefore, must be the one who allowed a testimony from the brother to establish that his brother is a Levi. So he says, what's the difference? How come he allowed a brother to testify and not a father? A brother is a Karov and Posel Edis just as much as a father is. So he says, no, it wasn't testimony there, it was Mesiach Lefi Tumai. He was just talking on his own, and he was saying things which show that his brother was a Levi without giving testimony. Even Apostle Aid is believed if he's Mesiach Lefi Tumai. And the same thing would have happened if it would have been the father, but that just wasn't the case. The Gemara now quotes an incident that supports this idea that Mesiach Lefi Tumai works even for someone who's Apostle Aidis. Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishmol, is a story that somebody who was talking, and he said, I remember when I was a child, my father used to pick me up from school, carry me on his shoulders. He took off my clothing and he put me in the mikvah so that I should be able to eat truma that evening. And Reb Chia adds that his friends used to call him Yochanan Oichel Chalois, and they used to keep away from him so as not to be metami his challah that he was eating. So this was a person speaking on his own. And obviously he's Pasal Eidus on himself, yet based on that, Mesiach Lefi Tumai, Rebbe paskin that he is a kosher kohen and he's allowed to be considered a kohen forevermore.